Hello, everyone, this is CRH Films. Today, I'll tell you about the 2006 movie, Idiocracy. Joe Bowers slept through 500 years and woke up to find himself the smartest person on the planet. In the 21st century, human evolution reached its peak, but from that point, development started to regress. Those with high intelligence avoided having children, shirking the responsibility, while the less intellectually inclined had 5 or even 10 kids. This led to the nation's complete dumbing down. By 2505, the de-evolution had reached its zenith. However, Corporal Joe Bowers, who worked quietly in a military archive, has no idea about the cruel twists of fate that await him. He is offered to participate in an experiment involving cryogenic freezing. Officer Collins explains to his colleagues why Joe was chosen for this mission. Joe isn't a star in the army, he's just an average guy in society. His lack of family, though, becomes the deciding factor for his selection. If the experiment fails, no one will even look for him. However, a woman had to be found among the civilian population for the experiment. The choice falls on a girl named Rita, who also has no family and is the heiress of an ancient profession. Her pimp, Upgrade, agrees to let her go in exchange for the government turning a blind eye to his dark deeds. And Rita, in exchange for the withdrawal of all lawsuits, Rita and Joe are placed in capsules for a year to test the stability of this technology. They meet for the first time right before freezing. Rita, not wanting to reveal her involvement in prostitution, introduces herself as an artist. The duo is placed in capsules and left in a secret location, but things don't go as planned. Officer Collins is arrested on charges of involvement in prostitution. The experiment was so secret that everyone who knew about it ended up behind bars. The building where the capsules were stored is demolished and replaced by a shopping center. The capsules are taken to a landfill. While Rita and Joe slept, the IQ of the population was steadily plummeting. However, in 2505, events occurred that completely changed the world. There was so much garbage that trash avalanches began. One of these avalanches released Rita and Joe's capsules, which had been buried under tons of waste for centuries. Joe's capsule ended up in the apartment of a man named Frito. The impact caused the capsule's lid to open, and the soldier woke up after 5 centuries of slumber. Confused about his whereabouts, Joe tries to engage Frito in conversation. But Frito is so engrossed in a TV show where the main character gets hit in the groin that he just tosses the unexpected guest out the window. While walking down the streets, Joe witnesses chaos, heaps of trash, and hostile individuals. When Joe tried to engage with people, they shouted incomprehensible words at him. After a sudden awakening, the military man feels unwell. Joe finds a hospital. After describing all his symptoms, a nurse directs Joe for a general examination. The protagonist ends up with Dr. Lexus. Joe notices a magazine on the table dated 2505. The doctor notices Joe lacks a barcode on his arm and calls the police. Joe has to flee. He decides to hide in a theater showcasing the best movie of the year. For 90 minutes, they display a posterior emitting distinctive sounds. In the evening, while wandering the city streets, Joe witnesses a girl hitting a vending machine for not dispensing paid food. When the girl leaves, Joe approaches the machine, coinciding with the police's arrival. Law enforcement notices Joe lacks a barcode and arrests him. Through the patrol car window, Joe sees Rita's capsule. Joe is taken to a court hearing. He's assigned a public defender, who turns out to be Frito. But Frito has no intention to defend Joe. Alongside the prosecutor, Frito belittles Joe and mocks him. The judge declares Joe guilty and sends him to prison. But before that, he needs a barcode tattoo. The machine performing the task is as backward as the people who invented it. Instead of Joe Bowers, she entered a man in the database with the name, Not Sure. Following this, Joe undergoes an intelligence test even a chimpanzee could pass. The protagonist arrives at the prison, but his reluctance to take the place of the other man works in his favor. Joe capitalizes on the guard's low brain activity. The man claims he should have been released today. The security guard decides that Joe is too dumb, gives him a slap and sends him to the exit. After an ingenious prison escape, Joe conceives a plan. He aims to find a time machine and return to his time, dismissing this nightmare of a future. He's convinced the device exists, given its development in 2005. Joe heads to Frito, the only person he knows in this world. Joe asks for help in locating the time machine, promising untold wealth if Frito assists in finding the device and going back to the past. Joe pledges to open a bank account in Frito's name and deposit money with interest. Frito loves money, so he agrees to help. But first, they need to find Rita. Excessive attractiveness helped the girl settle into the new world. Rita has been spending the past few days charming a fool who hopes for an intimate connection with her. Joe finds Rita and takes her with him. They need to hurry as the police are already after them. After a few kilometers, Frito's car battery dies. The trio has to cover the remaining distance on foot. They arrive at an unbelievably massive shopping mall. Frito assures them that the time machine is located here. Rita goes to the restroom, and in the meantime, Joe is confronted by law enforcement. However, instead of being taken into custody, he's brought to the White House to meet the president. Inside, he meets people who are hard to label as ministers, as well as the current president of the United States, Mr. Camacho. Camacho holds the results of Joe's test. It turns out Joe is the smartest person on the planet. Camacho addresses Congress, assuring that issues like crop failure, dust storms, and economic problems will no longer trouble the population. Since Joe, who's just been appointed as a minister, can solve all these problems within a week. But Joe has no idea how to address these issues, let alone in a week. He summons Frito to the White House to get detailed information about the time machine's location and finally escape this doomed future. However, due to Frito's lack of intellect, he can't provide a verbal description of the location. Instead, he draws a map, which also proves insufficient to lead Joe to the time machine. He realizes he can't leave until he figures something out, so he pretends to address the problems at hand. He asks for Rita to be brought to the White House and heads to a wheat field. At first, he doesn't understand why nothing is growing until he sees that the fields are being watered with a branded carbonated beverage, Brondo. Everyone in 2505 consumes it from birth, and since it contains electrolytes, people assumed it would be good for plants too. Joe insists that water is needed for the wheat. But the dim-witted ministers stubbornly resist. Joe claims he can understand plant language and accompanies the ministers back to the field. There, he pretends to consult the wheat, asking if it prefers water or Brondo. The wheat chooses water. The ministers, influenced by their own ignorance and limited brain activity, believe it all and the water starts saturating the soil. Joe hopes his plan will work. However, his actions decrease the demand for the beverage, leading to falling stock prices and companies having to lay off employees. Later, an enraged mob storms the White House. The ministers blame Joe for everything. The protagonist faces the law once again. He is found guilty and sentenced to 1 night of rehabilitation. It's a show where lawbreakers are pitted against Bigfoot. Eventually, Rita comes to see Joe. He persuades her to escape in the time machine, as he's beyond saving. To prevent him from repeating his ingenious escape, he's chained to a stone. The night of rehabilitation arrives. Joe is released into the arena, where he must fight the Bigfoot, with minimal chances of survival. Meanwhile, Rita gathers her belongings in the White House. But as she gazes at the unremarkable cityscape, she spots a solitary blooming rose. Rita convinces Frito to go to the stadium to inform the president that Joe's plan has actually worked. On their way, they notice signs of life in the wheat fields. Despite Joe's dire circumstances, luck remains on his side. The show's main star, Beef Supreme, fails to operate as Bigfoot and becomes trapped. This gives Rita and Frito the time to reach the execution site and talk about the future wheat harvest. However, Camacho doesn't believe Rita's words. Using her charm and a small amount of money, Rita manages to persuade the cameraman. Beef Supreme escapes from under the debris and starts delivering justice. However, luck favors Joe once again. In the nick of time, Rita manages to activate the broadcast from the field, showing the long-forgotten green sprouts of wheat. Camacho cancels the punishment and throws an unprecedented party to celebrate the joyful news. At the party, Joe learns that the time machine he so diligently searched for turned out to be a theme park attraction about world history, possibly from an alternate universe. They're required to stay. Soon, Joe becomes the president. He promises to improve the population's literacy level. Joe marries Rita, and they have 3 children. Meanwhile, Frito, along with his 8 wives, gives birth to 32 children. Joe promotes Frito to a higher position. He becomes the vice president and is no longer an attorney.